profession. And then very, very quickly, as you mentioned, when I was 27, my husband, who was Air Force helicopter pilot, went off on a training mission and just never came home. And it was on the second morning after his death that it was very clear to me. I awakened with this idea of like, whoa, okay, this is my initiation. This is my calling card into being of service in the hospice profession. Now, it took me 2 years before I could actually get myself together to go back into nursing. But when I did go back, it was into hospice care. And I specialized there for many, many years. And it not only changed my personal trajectory, but also my professional trajectory. And I did that for many years in Georgia. Then I found out about this spiritual psychology program here in California and came to California, where I met you, but I also did some hospice nursing here too. And then I realized that the profession itself needed some support, because there's a machinery or mechanism. You get into the system and you just kind of run through it. And I was realizing people were missing opportunities to come together, to share, to have intimacies, to have conversations, because things were happening too quickly. So in the midst of my hospice career, I also developed the idea of a death and dying dinner party for people that wanted to come together and talk about the ideas around death and dying in a different environment, not where there was a deathbed present, but there was food and a table and 12 people and candles lit and simple structure, but safety and community to talk about their ideas, or even to grieve a recent loss. That we had people that attended that were actually going through the dying process themselves. So I've always been fascinated with this. Death is still the ultimate teacher, my ultimate teacher, a great and very painful initiator. But if you can bear with that process, bear going through it, what it can give you in your life and living, the aliveness that it can create in you, if you can come to understand what it's trying to offer you, is like nothing else on the planet, as death as the great initiator.
Yeah. I feel, I have been blessed and fortunate by your side and to sit at these death and dying dinner tables. And I found it to be such a rich conversation, because it really did kind of open up things for me in that space of like, let's get curious of what's actually underneath. And it seems like we're at a time now where these conversations are really kind of on the forefront of people's minds, but there might be some fear that that people are not wanting to talk about. And we did just cut it off on Facebook. I am recording, so let's just keep going and we'll record, and then I'll post it later if that's okay with you. Does that feel good?
Sure.
Or would you like to
stop?
I found that these conversations are really important and valuable. Having the conversation on death and dying, and just some of the more intimate discussions underneath it. What has been your experience, and what do you think that people really want to talk about in the face of death? Or what are some of the guidelines or guideposts that you would offer to people at this time? Because we're not only facing the death of loved ones or that fear, but we're also facing the death of loss, a loss of job, loss of like you said earlier, identity, loss of structure and form. So how can we kind of move through this time in a more graceful way with that, with a loving support? What does that look like to you? And
what I found most helpful for myself in my own process and the people that I was counseling at the time is space, just some space to explore, some space to discover, some space to be, to allow, to feel, as confronting as it is to feel exactly what you are feeling, and then to grapple for some ground, for some idea that you are being transformed, that you're in a transformational process, which feels like coming apart, which can be very frightening, but to trust that this process has been happening for eons to all beings, And the issue with
Mhm.
being a human being is we have this consciousness around it. We have the awareness around it, which can be very confronting. But to trust that it is here to crack us open to the next iteration of ourselves, and just to give it a different context than maybe the one that we've been programmed to think about or to feel about in our culture. That death is to be beaten or to be pushed aside or to be not talked about, or is this taboo topic is part of the problem where it makes people feel separate from death and wanting to avoid even talking about death, much less leaning into death as a companion or death as a teacher or death as a friend, because it can be those things. So just thinking about death is a really good first step, thinking about your death, thinking about the death of someone that you love, and then feeling what it feels like in your system, so that then you know where to pay attention, you know where to drop in, you know what needs some space. If it provokes anxiety or if it provokes fear, well, then those are the areas that need your attention, that need your presence. So slowing down and not becoming distracted from the thing that's most present to you, especially if it's the death of a loved one, especially in the time of this pandemic, which can be so confronting, the speed at which things are happening. Because our nervous
Right.
systems are not meant to deal with it like this, you know, but that's what's happening. People are having to adjust and adapt very quickly. So as we were talking about earlier, if you as a personality or an ego construct have a really hard time with change and adaptability, then this is going to be much more confronting than somebody who can be more fluid, more adaptable. So just even having that awareness can be quite helpful. And leaning into people that have gone through the process, because death can cause us to feel quite alone and isolated in our own inner world, our own inner experience. Like, oh, it's nobody can know what I'm feeling. Nobody can know what it's like to be me. Well, that can be true. And yet there's an invitation to be open and to be vulnerable and to tune in to somebody else that might actually help tether you to something that feels nurturing or supportive or normalizing. As you mentioned before with your friend who you were helping go through the process, that I could be your tether, that I could be the person that you spoke to. So knowing that you are going through it alone in a particular way, but that then you can also be connected to somebody else is very helpful if you're willing to be vulnerable in that way and to open yourself up to that experience. It can be quite an intimate one to go through that process with somebody as a support person.
Yeah, well, I feel like this is part of the question, and I guess the answer always is within the question, but it's like, how vulnerable can I be in these moments? How vulnerable can I be with myself? And like you're saying, to slow down, to feel the nuances that are coming up, even this rise of energy, this collective fear that we've been seeing, and a lot of us have been experiencing. More people will lose their life in this pandemic, and you'll know more and more people who are losing their lives through this pandemic. And so it's really causing a lot of emotion to rise. And I love what you speak about with this vulnerability. Can you share a little bit more about that, and kind of maybe some ways that people can slow down and really settle into the nuances that they might be feeling and experiencing?
Well, I really appreciate this woman, Brene Brown. She speaks more beautifully about vulnerability than anyone I've ever heard. And for me personally, the vulnerability has been a key factor in my growth process, in my healing process. Initially in my 20s, when my husband died, I was quite guarded and quite shut down. Even though I could take care of people and become a caregiver, my own experience was much different. So I was having an inner turmoil, but on the outside, I was providing care to patients as they were dying. And I didn't become more fully integrated in my own experience until I opened myself up to reveal my insecurities, to reveal my fears, to reveal my doubts to maybe one or two people. You don't have to be vulnerable with the whole world. I wouldn't recommend that whatsoever. But vulnerability is understanding that we are these precarious creatures, you know, and that this life is very challenging, but vulnerability even though it feels uncomfortable as you step into the conversation or step into the question, I've never found, if I'm speaking with a person that feels safe to me, that my vulnerability has always led to greater connection, greater sense of support, greater intimacy, and me feeling I'm going to be okay. This person sees me and they still accept me and they're my champion. And so I simply encourage it. And to know that you're on the path of vulnerability when you feel like, oh, I don't want to share this. I don't want to share this. I don't want to share this. But it's this, the self-judgments can get in the way quite a bit of being more vulnerable. And just to be aware of that and just to encourage yourself to push through it. And again, it's just like finding even one person to start to reveal yourself more and more to can be really helpful.
I love Brene Brown as well. And for the people that are in my intimate circle, you have exemplified vulnerability more than anyone else I know. And I feel that it's really, you've been such a teacher to me in this, in the way that you share. You're always my prime example when I'm working with people of how slow you are to share, because you want to describe all the nuances that you're experiencing, and it helps me to open up and hold that loving space for you, which I think is what you're saying, is like find that one person who can actually hold you through this process, because not everybody will be able to hold this kind of weight. And that's okay, but there are those of us who can and who are willing to love those parts of you that are afraid or are nervous about change or feeling very isolated or alone. There are those of us who've cultivated the whatever it is, I guess, but the ability to hold and to really see the other person. I think that's a really valuable piece of information, so that we can start like lifting the lid off of this conversation. Right?
Yeah. And I also like to offer that, we're talking about holding space, and I can do that because I've done a lot of inner work, because I've slowed down enough to really nourish those parts of myself that I had disdain for, that I've been horrified by, or that I've just been so confronted with and in, that this level of self-acceptance really helps me to hold space for you or for anyone. But it's really challenging to hold space for somebody if you are in your own head. It just is not a comfortable thing to even try. So I think it's brilliant. A lot of people want to help people and be of service to people, but oftentimes their own stuff gets in the way of just being able to hold an empty container for that other person to then discover their own process. So I just wanted to make mention that doing your inner work is really a part of being able to arrive for somebody else as they unravel and they figure out what's happening internally for themselves.
So I would like to ask, so if people are kind of on the fence about having conversations with loved ones around death and dying, and they're experiencing their own fears and anxieties and insecurities, what are some of the tools that are pretty steadfast that you have found in order to do the inner work so that they can go out and reach out to their loved ones and have these conversations? What are some of the things that you've seen, experienced, heard, and really can share with others about the inner work, so that we can be more present with those that are going through, change, which we're all going through change right now.
Yeah. There's a bit of a discipline to it, which I know a lot of people don't like to hear, but it is about being very mindful and persistent with a practice, whether that practice is a meditation, whether it's journal writing, whether it's free form writing, whether it's spending time in nature, yielding to something that's greater than you perceive yourself to be. There is some need, if you're feeling anxiety in your body or fear in your body, and you have an idea that you want to support someone who's dying, my encouragement would be to be with that anxiety and fear before you decide to offer yourself to that other person. So that means that you got to sit with yourself and be with yourself and make time, whether that's 15 or 20 minutes, journaling about what that fear is inside of you and making friends with it, making space for it, not making it wrong, but understanding it's just part of your energetic system and that it needs some attention. and doing that again and again and again. You know, this is not a quick fix. This is an ongoing process. So it's not as if you drop in one time to your fear. You might have to drop into it 1,000 times. And it changes, like you mentioned before, it changes as you change. But to have this devotion and this ability to kind of scan your system, which is why meditation is such an important tool, so that you can start to distinguish that you are not your thoughts, that you are not your feelings, that you're not even your body. You are the observer. You are the awareness that all these things arise in. Really helps to the person to understand how to move forward, so that you can understand fear is present, but that doesn't have to overwhelm you or consume you. You can just understand that it's there and then move to the side. So it's like understanding how to navigate these realms, but the practices are simple. It's journaling, it's meditation, it's freeform writing. Those are the ones that have been really helpful to me.
And the freeform writing, for those of you in my community, that's what we call write and burn. It's a process of really allowing all of these energetics that are stuck in the body just to flow out in a stream of consciousness sort of way, and then burning them without rereading them, so that you can actually move the energy out of the body and make space. And the space that's there is the space that you can use to support yourself and to support others, which I really love. And the practice, the discipline, you know, I think so many of us right now, we have time and there's still some resistance to being disciplined. And what would you say about just having a daily practice and how that can support people facing death and dying and change? It's not just death and dying, you know, that we're talking about. This is also about the change that's happening internally, the transitions, the different losses that we're experiencing, and the grief. But can you speak a little bit about that, about the discipline and how that's impacted life?
This has not been an easy course for me, an easy path for me, the path of discipline. And what I'm understanding at 49, I feel a little late to the game, but it's okay, is this need for self-acceptance, to be keenly aware that wherever you are is okay, to let that be your starting point, that wherever you find yourself is okay. And then to take a breath and to move from that place. A lot of people wake up and then the programming mindset pops in from all their worries of the day before or all their worries of the future, and then the mind is just spinning there. And that is generally the way most people spend their day, with this processor just going. So it's upon waking that I find is the best space to do this in, before you grab your technology, before you open your computer, before you get online, to be with yourself. And even if that's just for 5 minutes, that's okay. That's enough. That's a start. To allow yourself upon waking 3 or 4 minutes of breathing and feeling what is happening for me. Where am I at internally? What is my mind doing right now? And taking some dominion over that experience, as opposed to exporting it, grabbing your phone and seeing if somebody's texted or seeing what your Instagram page is doing. To kind of interrupt that process, so that then you can tune into your heart energy and let your heart energy be the guiding force for the day. And as I mentioned, it's not about taking an hour of meditation in the morning. Cool if you can, but I don't know that many people who can or do that. If you can just take 2 or 3 minutes, it's about the consistency of it. And my encouragement is to do it early on in the day, or else the momentum will sweep you up, and then you're just sort of reacting instead of responding on the daily process. And the morning ritual is what I'll call it, is the best way that I've learned for myself, and that I've seen other people have success in being responders to their reality instead of reacting to their realities.
You know, I'm a big proponent of discipline practices. We follow the path of many in these 40-day processes that we've created in the Self-Love Tour. And I think it's really interesting that today is, in the Christian faith, they say that today is the day of the Last Supper. So today would actually be the 40th day, right before, or it's like the 40 days of Lent is just finishing. So it's always like we're in these processes for little bits of time. For me, I really like to distinguish them in chunks of time so that I don't feel overwhelmed, like, oh my, this is the rest of my life and then I'll never do anything. If I can just have a short period of time, 30 days, 40 days,
Yeah.
whatever it is, to get me like momentum and, yeah, I'm on day 25 and I'm going, I can do this. And you can see an end goal. And then it seems like that these practices kind of allow themselves to integrate over time. And then it's like we can keep adding things. So maybe you start with 2 minutes for 40 days or whatever. And then maybe the next 40 days, it's 5 minutes, and it just continues to build. And what happens is the presencing. And that's what I love. And I want to talk a little bit with you about how you have seen death be an opportunity to be present, and what that might look like and what that might feel like within family structures. And, for some people who are ready to embrace these conversations with loved ones, what would that look like, present with family members and loved ones?
Well, just to let you know that my entry point was a bit bumpy because I was a hospice nurse, and I would arrive to a patient's home and be, taken into the room of a dying person, and they might be in distress, having trouble breathing or having pain or having a full bladder. There might be something technical that I needed to do to support them. But it was an incredible opportunity to just be present. There was really nothing else that was happening except me and that person, and me troubleshooting, and me trying to assess what were their needs and how do I meet them. So for me, my role was really clear, and I really disappeared. It was not as if I was even self-conscious of what was happening for Laurel. I was simply there trying to accommodate whatever their needs were on the physical level mainly. And once they were physically comfortable, then I could delve into their emotional needs or their spiritual needs, which is incredible. It's an incredible opportunity. But if you're not physically comfortable, then you're not really going to have the energy to deal with your spiritual self or your emotional self. But I did find that was a incredible part of my work, that presence was simply happening because I was there for a purpose. So it may be a little different for people that are not in the profession, but still, if you are with somebody who is dying, to make them your focus. So to arrive with the intention to support them in whatever that looks like for them, because sometimes they might have a need that is unexpressed, or sometimes they might have a need that is really clear to you, but to stay intentionally focused on you offering your support to them. So it's sort of like yielding whatever you think you need personally, and arriving will offer presence. And presence will happen if you can arrive to support and to serve. That's just part of what presence is. It's a heart-to-heart connection. And if you could go in intentionally to support and serve that person, then automatically you will be present with them and for them, and they will feel that.
And this transcends, again, like all of this conversation, this transcends the topic of death. This is like how I can show up for someone as they're moving through whatever transition and change that they're going through, is really being present. But it seems like because death is so is so extreme for most of us to even wrap our heads around, what is this? I know that you did this video that I loved, and we'll figure out how to link that video into this as well. But you talk about death being the ultimate teacher, and some of the lessons, like the top lessons that you've learned from death and being close to death with many, and in your process of death. Can you speak a little bit about some of those lessons that you've learned through the process of death and dying? We've spoken about presence and some of the other things, but can you talk a little bit about how death has been your greatest teacher?
The main one that comes up is perspective, that death puts everything in perspective. And I make examples of how if you're taking care of someone who's dying and you happen to have to run out and run an errand to the bank or the store, which is different now because we're all masked and gloved and it's a pandemic, and there's no traffic anymore, so that can't even be an example to this point. But just to have some perspective that when you're talking about life and death, everything else seems to minimize, because those are the big ones, right? If somebody that you love is dying, that seems to permeate the experience. And so then the agitation of a spilled cup of coffee, or did somebody take the last piece of toast, or did somebody make a comment that hurt my feelings? It puts all those things into perspective. It's like, it's not really that big a deal. Nothing is really that big a deal. And so it helped me to not take myself so personally. Death kind of slapped me around, and I yielded to it. I yielded to what it was really trying to show me about how sacred this life experience is, and that these little agitations were just part of my ego, part of my personality that just wanted some attention. So death puts things in perspective, puts everything in perspective. It's one of
Do
the
you
big
feel
ones.
that that's similar with what's happening with this pandemic, that it's maybe starting to put some things into perspective for people?
Well, I hope so. This is the thing, because there's constant programming online, or the news. And if you are plugged into that, then you are not going to be able to gain perspective. Then you are just plugging into a machine that wants to take you into a place that is not really comfortable. So I had this thought of, those old-timey operators who sat in front of the switchboard and they would plug in the
Yes.
thing to the call. It's like we have to unplug. We have to unplug from that fear programming, and we have to plug into some source programming or some spiritual programming or some nature programming, or just your heart programming. It's like you have to decide to pull the plug on those other programs and to put the plug into something that feels more inspiring and supportive to you. This is what I think is the big deal right now, is that there's a lot of information happening, but what are you tuning into? What are you focused on? And if you're not feeling comfortable in your body, then why do you still plug into the old program? Like, just pull out of it and then see what's here, regulate that. And then if you have the energy, plug into something that's more creative, or in the realm of possibilities, in the realm of collaboration or creativity, because you can do that. You can choose that. That program is also here. That's why you and I are connecting in this conversation, right? But that's part of the problem, is that the fear program is always running. And so we just have a habit of going to that. It's a habit, and we can break that habit, but you can't break a habit without awareness or without the discipline.
Yeah, so taking the dominion over of what you're bringing in, so that you can actually be present with what is happening inside. Even my mom the other day, she said, I'm taking a break from the news today. And I was so proud of her, because at my house, the news is on constantly. My dad is always really into what's happening outside. And my mom just said, I'm going to go sit in the garden. And I was like, yes, this is so refreshing, and it will bring such life. And this. So speaking of, and then we'll probably finish with our talk because of our technical issues, and we'll figure out, I'm going to send this, I'm recording this now on, and so we'll send it out in the email so people can get a hold of it and get in touch with this information, and with you, Laurel. But what are some of the things that you would recommend to some of the older generation who may or may not be facing imminent death? What are some of the things that you would share with them, like just little seeds to how that they can communicate the things that they want? What would that look like? Or a conversation with an elder, or someone who might be in a vulnerable place right now physically. Are there any tools or guides that you have for them, and how they can communicate with their loved ones, and what that might feel like, and maybe around their legacy, what they want to leave behind? Or the thought that kind of spawned this conversation with us was the things that we want to be forgiven for, or, you know, life regrets, or different conversation starters like this? Are there things that you can offer in this realm for those people?
Yeah. It's not a simple answer because there are many different entry points to this, because there's the real practical measures that need to be addressed, that if you know that you're dying or you know that you're sick, it would be lovely for you to put your affairs in order. So that could be legal, that could be money, that could be physical things. So there's something called an advance directive that I would love to speak to. This is not only what needs to happen, because you're talking more the question about emotional and spiritual context. But I have found that when people have their advance directives in order, and they might go through a document such as the 5 wishes, which is very simple and beautiful, it will tell you what you need to address. Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? Where would you like your body to rest? Would you like to have a big party? Would you like to have music in the room when you die? Would you like to have people praying for you? Would you like to have people touching you? Would you like to have an alternative funeral? People could come and be in your home while your body is there, for them to adjust to that death before then going into a mortuary. There are many, many decisions that can be made. Do you want to be on life support? Do you want to have antibiotics? There are just a lot of technical things that people, the general public, doesn't really know about. And this is, of course, if you are in a dying process. If you have an accidental death, it's a little bit different, but you can still find that document, fill out that document. You can have a power of attorney. So these are kind of technical things that aren't very sexy, but are very important when death comes for you or your loved one, that you can pull out the document and know exactly what that person wanted in a time and space where they weren't upset about death and dying, but could be settled and more contemplative and really make some good decisions about their health care and their care around the time of death. But these documents also then do go into the emotional components. Do you have regrets? Do you have something that you would like to offer to your friends and family? Do you want to write letters to the people that you love for them to read after you've gone? I encourage people, which might sound strange, but I've done it with a couple of groups now, to write their own obituary as if they have lived their full life, whether they're 85, 95, 105. And they're writing their obituary. If they're doing it mindfully, then they can see where the gap is between where they are and where they are at their time of death. So then they can see, oh, what do I need to address? What do I need to focus on between where I am now and where I think I will be at my time of death? And so it's a really interesting tool or practice. It can be a bit confronting, but I do recommend it, because it will highlight to you, oh, I haven't even considered that idea, or hadn't considered that I need to have that conversation. So I would encourage somebody to write their own obituary. I would encourage them to look at advance directives. And then I would encourage people to start having these more challenging conversations, these emotional conversations with people in their families or close friends, to start to say things that they might be afraid of saying or haven't said yet, to make amends, to even whisper like, oh, I might want to have a conversation with you next week about something that happened 20 years ago that's been on my mind. Why wait? There's no reason to wait. I mean, there's a lot of reasons people give themselves for waiting, but I'm offering, and the invitation is to push through that discomfort, to have these conversations so that we can create relationships that feel more honest and more authentic and more inspiring.
I love it. I love it, Laurel. I love you. I love how you take both the foundational and the mystical, and you bring it together into form. It's so helpful, the insights and the wisdom that you bring forward today. I'm so grateful. So I think we'll end here due to our technical situation, and I'm going to sort it out and figure out how to email you all this beautiful transmission from our sister Laurel. And we'll be doing a grief group, a little bit deeper dive just here on Zoom, so it'll be a little bit easier to manage in the next coming days. So be looking out for that. And is there anything else you want to share before we sign off?
There's this practice, Ho'oponopono, you may know it, of connecting in your heart space and then sharing with somebody that I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, please forgive me, and thank you. And whether or not you can do that face to face with your loved ones, you can do that with them in your heart. So it's a very simple practice that I just wanted to offer because it was in my heart to share it right now. These are very powerful words and very heart opening and heart revealing, and anyone can do this practice regardless of if they have an opportunity to do it with the person that they love or not. They can do it with the person in their heart instead.
I love it. It's one of my favorite practices. I love you, Laurel. Thank you, beautiful sister. Thank you for your patience with my technology situation and the Wi-Fi. And thank you for sharing yourself so vulnerably always with me and with the community. I love you.
I love you. Thank you.
All right. We'll be in touch, everyone. Thanks so much, Lulu. Talk to you soon. Bye.